when I lived in the Middle East, although it wasn't lockdown in that sense, the sense of scarcity and imminent danger was very similar.
Yeah.
So that was quite hard, because I thought, oh God, I thought all this stuff had ended. Now I'm right back where I started. We were chased out, basically. We had to either, because my parents were political activists, so they left Iraq because they were sentenced to death, so they ran away. And when and so they chased them all the way to United Arab Emirates or Abu Dhabi, and because the political situation was, you know, the leaders of the Gulf were in cahoots with Saddam Hussein. We were seen as dissidents, so we could be sent back to Saddam Hussein, who would effectively kill them.
I'm in awe of the fact that your parents were like political activists, and the fact that they had to escape like that. Like for me, these are the stories that need to be cinemized, but by you. Do you know what I mean? Because I guess for me, like a lot of the time when I think about like doing this work, a lot of the time people are like, oh, where does it come from? Why do you do this work? And not because necessarily my parents were political activists, but they were in their own right. They might not be seen as, but especially my mother, she was in her own right. And so when I think about your parents being political activists and having to leave, did you say, was it Iraq?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess for me, I wonder if that had an effect on you and why you decided to do the work that you're doing at this moment.
Yeah, totally. I think because, you know, politics has always been part of my life, not because I wanted it to be, but essentially, if you're born into a dictatorship and you have family that is fighting against that, whether you like it or not, it will have an impact on you. And the dictatorship that we had, you know, it was, you know, one of the most violent and extreme. So, you know, if you did something wrong, there was no rule of law, there was no second chances. You just were tortured to death, and not just you, but your whole extended family. So it wasn't that you could take a threat and say, you know what, I don't care, I'll die for the cause. But essentially, you'll kill your whole fucking tribe if you did that. And so, yeah, that meant also what my life choices were determined by politics, and my country's politics was determined by the colonizer, because the colonizer liked this man and they supported him, and they you know, they gave him arms, they gave him intelligence, they gave him torture techniques, you know, all of that malarkey. And so what my parents had to go and like seek refuge with the other side, and the other side happened to be Iran at the time, and you know, and the intersectionality of being a minoritized Muslim in your own Muslim sort of community, as you know from your own experience, is like, oh fuck, like there's nowhere safe, you know what I mean? And so because I'm Shia and, you know, the Middle East and the Muslim world majority is Sunni, it meant a different kind of challenge where you have to prove, you know, you may have felt that you have to prove your Muslimness to your brothers and sisters, so-called, but they're the one that are perpetrating the violence against you. And using, you know, in my case, my Shia-ness to prove that I'm not only not Muslim, but I'm only not Iraqi, that I don't belong, that I deserve to be exterminated, and that I, you know, I have no right to life. Because, you know, one of Saddam Hussein's kind of propaganda stuff was like, you know, Shias are worse than Jews and fleas, so we could exterminate them like that. So, you know, we learned how to hide who we are from a very early age, and I had the privilege of being able to hide who I am and pretend to be. And then you come to white supremacy, and then it tells you something else completely, and then you have to you're identified with the people that were your oppressors.
No, definitely.
And ISIS is supposed to be like me, but ISIS would kill me because I'm Shia. And so if I'm a Muslim terrorist, I'm exactly the kind of Muslim that the terrorists would kill me for. But yeah,
complexity.
yeah,
Definitely that complexity. Like you said, in terms of my own personal experience
yeah,
of, you know, like living in like East North London, and there not being a large community of, let's say, like Nigerian or even Black
yeah,
Muslims, and going to mosque that may be of an Asian or Turkish background, and feeling very much like I shouldn't be there, or being looked at funny, or being seen as less Muslim,
mm,
and my other Muslim sisters. And there's that whole thing,
mm,
even Muslim women, even in that space, being
yeah,
can't go and pray at the mosque, or you shouldn't really be at mosque. And then me
yeah,
go
yeah,
and then, like you said, being oppressed in the oppressed group is
yeah,
very much a bit of a mind fuck, and it's very, very difficult, especially with people who which you should be sharing the same value with.
mm,
So going to the mosque thinking, but I'm just here to do my salah and go home. Like, I
yeah,
honestly don't want anything else. And
yeah,
it felt like I don't belong, is very difficult. And so sometimes I can understand why my mum decides to travel to South London,
yeah, totes,
to be around Nigerian Muslims and to feel
yeah,
more part of community. And that's something that I've still been dealing with, even in terms of like not wearing a hijab, and that
yeah.
whole conversation about
That's
me.
another thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the next thing. That's a whole, like, you're not really Muslim, da, 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 and all of this stuff
Yeah.
with it. Well, people don't even understand. I have my own battles with that, and I'm still trying to figure that out for myself.
Can I just tell you, I have my own battles with that too. So,
Mhm,
and I wear it in the
mhm,
sense that, you know, I don't like, by the time I've processed my hijab journey, I genuinely believe that Islam does not require you to wear the hijab. I honestly believe that. But by the time I realized that, it became too much of who I am.
yeah, yeah.
And taking it off would be like renouncing a bit of who I am.
Hmm.
But also, I know it will be used by white supremacists against my peoples.
You know, since we're speaking about hijabs, like, let's go for it in terms of, I'll never forget, I was on a call with you, right? And when I tell you, I don't think I've laughed like this in such a long time, and it was during lockdown, and I was like, I was so in awe of what you were saying, and basically you're speaking.
When?
Do you remember the call we was on, and we were speaking about the face masks? We were talking about
Oh
face masks and saying, now all look like Muslim terrorists now with the face masks, and I was just like, oh yeah, I absolutely love this energy.
yeah.
And I guess just thinking about, you know, the Muslim community, and thinking about women in particular, and how, I guess, like, Islamophobia affects particularly Muslim women. And I guess even for me, as someone who doesn't wear hijab, like, I'm fully aware of, yeah, I'm Muslim, but you can't necessarily identify me as Muslim. And I just kind of wanted to have that conversation with you around Islamophobia, but especially for Muslim women who wear hijabs. And
Yes, so gendered Islamophobia, yes.
that's the term I was looking for.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I did a whole event on it actually in Parliament, and was looking at how, like, Muslim women politicians navigate that, particularly people like Saida Warsi and all this, because, like, fair enough, none of them wear the hijab, but their Muslimness is always used by their, if you like, enemies, but also their community, the political community against them. And then also their own Muslim community will feel that they're not good enough because they're not hijabi, or they're working with infidels, basically. So, like, where do you go to get that strength to sustain you, to heal you, to keep you going? Because, like, it's totally unsafe. Like, I know if I go into a mosque that is not specifically Shia and I want to pray, I feel really unsafe, and I feel like I have to constantly look, and I choose, like, the sort of the most obscure part of the women's section.
Oh, no. Right, yeah.
If they have a women's section, yeah,
If they have a women's section in it.
yeah. And I remember when I used to work, before I worked in feminism, I used to work in politics, community relations, and, you know, preventing all that shit. And I used to go into lots of South Asian Muslim communities, particularly up north. And we used to, like, you know, go and meet with religious leaders. And I used to be the manager, and I had an older Asian man as my member of staff. So I managed him. But, you know, he was an uncle. He's lovely. I love Yusuf. He's, like, the best. But the minute they saw him, they all, like, ignored me. I was not there. And when we went to the mosque, it was like, sorry, sister, you have to stay outside. And then Yusuf would say, yeah, but she's with me and she's my manager. And they were like, well, there's no provisions for Muslim sisters. They were like, okay, well, let's go to a coffee shop and have our meeting. And once I took a group of funders, and they were, the Pears Foundation, I don't know if you know of them. He's really interested in doing like philanthropy work and all that stuff. So I took him to Muslims community in Leicester, and they would let him in. And so he turned around and said to me after they got back into the car, I said, Huda, they let a Jewish man into the mosque, but not a Muslim woman. I was like, I know, man, go figure.
I definitely feel like white supremacy is rife, very rife at the moment, especially in this COVID era. I think even just seeing some of the unfair treatment in terms of us being able to celebrate Ramadan, and whereas the weekend before there was enough people at the beach sunbathing, but then there was all these reports of, yeah, Eid celebrations, please stay at home, don't go to each other's houses, and people not actually really understanding and seeing how we're being discriminated. To them that seems little, but we can't even celebrate one of our biggest celebrations in a way in which we need to. And I guess just seeing those things, especially just during COVID, do you feel that how do you feel the Muslim community were treated during this time?
I think what's really hard is religion and faith is racialized also.
Yeah.
So if you are a white person who is Christian, your experience of faith and religion is very, very different if you are a minoritized person. And if you are a Muslim, your faith has almost replaced your race in the way the public talk about you and perceive you. So before we had Asian as a description to mean anybody who's not black or white.
Yeah.
Now we have Asian and Muslim, but we don't have Asian and Hindu or Asian and Sikh. We just have, there is a special category for Muslims that is quite special, and we feel, it's the thing that distinguishes us from other Asians in a way that we don't distinguish between Hindus and Sikhs. We just lump them together.
Yeah.
But with Muslims, it's a special, subtle kind of discrimination. That is something that survivors of domestic abuse from particular faith communities really live every day, but don't know how to express, in the same way that we didn't have a way of expressing intersectionality until somebody came up with the term.
Yeah.
Gendered Islamophobia doesn't quite cut it, I feel, because gendered Islamophobia talks about the way in which Muslim women, particularly visible Muslim women, are targeted and are harmed. But still, it's not enough. It's not enough to describe the myriad of ways in which, COVID has enabled an environment where your faith, your race, and your ethnicity have become tools of suppression by white supremacy, but also from your own communities. So, if you don't fast, does that make you not a good Muslim? If you're trying to prevent your risk of catching COVID by not, for example, fasting or being in community with others, is that used as a form of spiritual abuse, or is wider society and the political powers that be exaggerating the risk so that it denies you from your source of power? Or because I feel when the outbreak first happened, one of the things that I kept saying to friends is that I know I can't trust the media because I know how they report about Muslims. I know that's true. But I also can't trust the government because I know how racist they are, and so I know they're not telling the truth.
Yeah.
So who do I go to for information that is credible, that enables me to make my own mind up? I'm not a public health expert. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I can't, if the media tells me this is a pandemic, is it the same way as it tells me that Muslim terrorists are pandemics?
Yeah.
And if the government tells me that, you know, British values means that you never criticize your government, or that you always do as you are told, then I know that's not true either.
Yeah.
So I think the Muslim community has not only disproportionately been impacted by directly through death and illness, which has been documented, you know, quite well. The first, is it 5 out of 6, or is it 9 out of 10 clinicians that died were Muslim?
Wow.
In fact, the first one was a black Muslim doctor that passed away from COVID. We know that, you know, at the highest echelons of power, like in the clinical medical world, like the, you know, I think she's the head of the Midwifery Council, who's a black woman. She says prejudice and discrimination against black and minoritized people runs at every level of the NHS, whether it's you as a doctor, you as a patient, you as a manager, you as a pharmacist, you as a porter, whatever level and form or arm of NHS you work at, you will be disproportionately discriminated against because of your color and your ethnicity compared to a white person. Add that to that gender, and then, you know, and even the models about flight or fright, freeze, flight or fight, can't be applied to us as people of color, because even that's dangerous. Particularly if you're a black person, you can't fight in danger from white supremacy, and you can't run, because in either case they kill you. In either case, and so you have to find a way of managing that stress, in which you're just, you know, your instincts telling you everything, every cell in your body is telling you run or fight, but you have to hold it down, and you have to give a very, I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm not a danger to you, I'm not a threat.
Yeah.
And that like that level of hormones and adrenaline must go somewhere.
Yeah.
And doing it daily, that must go somewhere.
Definitely.
And so I feel like on many levels, minoritized people, Muslim communities, and Muslim women have really and continue to suffer under COVID restrictions. And the way in which public policy is formulated it reinforces that.
Yeah. No,
it doesn't alleviate it.
No, I definitely agree. And I think even just the thing that you said about the fight or flight. Like, one thing that I find with myself is that I'm literally, because I don't know if you've heard, there's like fight, flight, freeze, flop, and friend. And what I find is that I'm actually sometimes in one situation doing all 5 in like one interaction. So there's a part of me that will fight a little bit, be like, okay, Kafayat, move back a bit, then flight, then freeze, then just flop, be like, you know, let me do the friend thing, so you know that we're fine, and do the nice voice, and then I go back to fighting, push it back. And so I found myself doing all of those things. And like you said, imagine all the hormones, the adrenaline, my psyche, just the tiredness after being in one meeting and having to, several of myself have to show up in that meeting in order just to get to the other side. So if I do give a point, I am assertive, having to be like, but you know what I mean, and kind of like be like, I don't, you know, and ensure that they're okay by the end of it. And like you said, that just being so tiring. You mentioned about the Faith and VAWG coalition. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that work and why you decided to come together, and the work that you do and how things have been since you started?
Yes, absolutely. I just want to say one thing about the fight and flight thing and how you described your experience. And just as why I think like minoritized and black women are kick-ass, because can you imagine a white person trying to respond to danger, survive, risk assess, adopt multiple strategies, and be coherent and intelligent at the same time? that wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of labor and magic is totally erased from our experience. Like no one ever realizes the extent of work that you have to do and the strength and resilience and resources that you have at your disposal to be just like that all the time. Without it comes like second nature,
honestly,
you know. And so I want to salute you, Kafayat, and all women like us who say, you know, we do this without, it's like blinking, it's like breathing.
Yeah.
And I don't think women from the majority society could ever survive the way we can survive and continue to kind of push for more and ask for more of what is rightfully ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so that explains why I kind of felt that the Faith and VAWG coalition needs to kind of happen, because it fills a gap in the women's sector that I feel has for far too long been unable to holistically support survivors of faith.
Yeah.
And, you know, the analysis is very, very simple when it comes to the work around the Faith and VAWG coalition. That the women's sector was born out of a particular historical moment in time in British society and European context. It was born in the 70s. And the 70s was an era in which the rise of the women's movement coincided with a lot of other things that are happening socially and politically, like the increasing secularization of the state, like the, you know, reinforcement of the human rights narrative, like the recognition that actually, you know, the civil rights movement led to the understanding of how actually women's oppression is also linked to a wider structural form of oppression, like, you know, the oppression against Black people and minoritized people. And so, you know, the DNA of the women's movement in the UK, call it second wave, call it whatever wave, I don't know, is very much secularist, which for me is okay, that's fine, that works quite well. But it's secular, but when it's secularist, there's something about actively pushing away and denying someone's identity that corresponds to their faith and spirituality. And so, informed by the European experience and the white experience of faith, which was used as a tool of oppression and a form of power, of course it makes sense to have a feminist movement that sees religion as the baddie.
Yeah.
And so therefore, why would you think anything other than anything to do with religion and faith is completely separate to women's empowerment? In fact, the further away from each other they are, the better.
The better, yeah.
But as we know, an intersectional perspective does recognize that we are multiple peoples of multiple identities and multiple experiences.
Yes, indeed.
And particularly for somebody like me, my faith has been the thing, the resource, the space where I go to be in touch with who I am. You know, it's been the form of my identity that has been the most nourishing and enriching. It's helped me grow. It's helped me fight for equality. It's helped me fight for justice. And it's helped me feel strength when I was drained. It helped me feel healed when I sought refuge. And it's inspired me to make the world better for everybody. I know it sounds corny, but literally that is why I pray, that is why I fast, that is why I believe, that is why I wake up in the morning and do the work that I do. So I think the women's sector has traditionally been unable to understand that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And it has therefore decided that we can be divided into silos, and there's a feminist part, and there's a BME part,
Mm-hmm.
and there are cultural parts. So we can talk about race and culture, and we can have culturally sensitive services
Mm-hmm.
that cater for your cultural needs, but can't cater or understand your spiritual and religious needs.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, cultural needs is your spiritual and religious needs,
Yeah.
in some shape or form.
Yeah.
Because you cannot always disentangle culture from faith.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
And also being a feminist from a faith background is really hard. It is really hard because, like I mentioned in the conversation before, you are constantly living at the edges of all these faces.
Yeah.
You're not quite in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
You're always in the margins going,
Yeah. Yeah. Wherever you are, even when you
yes,
think of people, there's always something.
yes. And so it is essentially, part of it was really being selfish and wanting to have a tribe to belong to and say,
Yeah.
am I the only one that feels this way? But I was fortunate enough to meet other women working in the sector from multiple faiths who say the same thing. They say the same thing. They say we have to code switch when we're talking in the sector with our colleagues and peers. So we can't use a certain lexicon that alludes to higher powers or the spiritual or the holy, because that's seen as like, that's religious, and you can't be that stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Surely you're a rational, intelligent person who does not believe in magic.
Yeah, I was gonna say that if it's not religious, they'll see it as rituals, or they'll see it as some type of like voodoo.
Yes,
In
it's a
particular,
harmful practice.
Yeah, it's a harmful practice. Like that's one thing I've noticed, especially when I speak to my parents. Growing up in Nigeria, they grew up in Islam, but even Christians, everybody celebrated both religions.
Yes.
Like, so it wasn't strange. So even like I've got aunties who are not related, they're Christian, they come to the mosque too. They come and do celebrations, and it's part of the culture as opposed to it being religious. It's like, this is what we do back home. Like everybody's kind of interwoven. And I think your point around the women's sector, and it's something that I speak on a lot, and I always find it difficult just being able to bring who I am into that space and having those conversations, and actually having to explain to management why, yes, we are speaking about religious institutions. This is part of her needs assessment. She wants to find a safe place where she feels like she's able to connect to her spiritual power, and them not being able to get that. So I definitely need to tap into the faith.
Yeah, most def. Yes, because we're the aim of the kind of coalition is to help. Essentially, it is ultimately about helping survivors from faith communities get a better service from us, the sector. And so we're not there to preach religion. We're not there to convert people. We're not there to say, you know what, abolish all these specialist secular spaces. No. What we're saying is, if you have an intersectional understanding of the world around you and you want to support survivors, particularly women, you will need to know that there are various things that you need to do in order to help them. Just like you would do a risk assessment on the dash RIC. There are certain questions that if you don't ask, you could be minimizing risk and enabling harm. And purely from a professional, women-centered perspective, you'd want to know what these are. And I'm not, we're not asking people to become religious experts and have, degrees in canon law. All we're saying is you need to develop, an ability to ask questions, but also like a relationship with people that you often thought were the enemy. Because not every religious institution or pastor or imam or rabbi will be misogynistic. In fact, they are the ones that can hold perpetrators to account in a way that, as a secular woman's sector will never be able to.
Yeah.
And you need to develop sustainable long-term relationships with these communities who you have marginalized for years by virtue of being silent on the oppression that they have faced.
And just like, I guess, on the conversation around faith and violence against women and girls, something that comes to mind, or a case that really comes to mind, is the case of Shamima Begum.
Yes.
And for me, just how I've done some work with an organization around child sex exploitation. And for me, when I think about the case of Shamima Begum, I definitely feel like this is a young woman who has been exploited, who has been groomed. And the frustration of hearing her case and seeing how the wider society does not see that she is a child, and a child
Yes.
that has been groomed and who has been a victim of child sexual exploitation, or not sexual exploitation, but exploitation, I should say.
Yes.
And who knows, maybe even sexual exploitation.
Absolutely.
And I kind of, especially because of the work that you do, I kind of just wanted to hear what you feel about Shamima's case, and I guess ways that we can support young Muslim women in terms of then how we can support them. Because I also just think about other cases, even though this is a bit different, but the case of Shri Abdi, and just how that case was treated and resolved. And just, I just want to just hear your thoughts on.
Well, anybody who knows me knows how I feel about the case of Shamima Begum. I've written about it extensively, I've written blogs, articles. I have it on my website, muslimfeminist.co.uk.
Say that one more time. What's the website?
Muslim Feminist.
Love that.
Yeah. So I very strongly share your analysis that Shamima is a survivor and a victim. And had she been a white woman and a white girl, she would have a very different story. To be, there's something about this society that decides to punish women who are seen as deviant. God help you if you're a brown or a black woman who is deviant, because then, there will be no mercy. And we clearly see that there was no mercy shown. She lost 2 of her children, they died, the trauma that she must have gone through. We don't know if these children were born out of rape. We don't know if these, she was shackled up somewhere. All we know, it is a very dark place to be when you were in Shamima's shoes. What's happened with Shamima is that she has experienced the wrath of being a minoritized young woman who went against the status quo, but also a woman who has, or a young child when she first left, a young child who was seeking genuine knowledge, because I have written about her case and others, that the 3 young women who traveled from Bethnal Green to Syria. And whilst doing research on, the circumstances around them being groomed, we know that these girls were very intelligent, and they weren't enticed by this idea of finding your sort of knight in shining armor, riding on a horse, saving you. That's not really, I think, was their motivation. I think their motivation was a seeking for something that is authentic, a seeking for something that is welcoming of who you are in your totality, and an ability to do something and affect change in the world that is for good. Granted, they chose the wrong society to sort of be aligned with. But if these are women who have nowhere else to call home than London, they are utterly the product of British society. They weren't, if British society was doing something good, we wouldn't have had these women being groomed. Clearly, something about being a British Muslim means that you are harmed, so that you need to find refuge somewhere else. It's not safe for you to be a British Muslim woman, essentially. And it is also not a place where you feel that you can be who you are and make a difference to the world. So I firmly believe that they went there seeking an alignment of self and purpose. and their groomers exploited that. You know, they promised them that, and that's something that they couldn't do. And I think recognizing that people in power feel that if we recognize this as an issue, then what we are doing is admitting that there is structural harm in the society and things are not fit for purpose. But that's not something that they're prepared to do, because that will require an overhaul of the system. So we will make them scapegoats, and we make them sacrificial lambs, and we'll make an example out of them, because that's how we maintain white supremacy. Like I said, if Shamima was a white woman, look at the furore in which, and quite rightly, we talk about white girls being groomed and targeted. But these same reports do not highlight how at the very same time, these perpetrators were also grooming Asian women and Muslim women and Muslim girls. And so what happens is that perpetrators find your weakest point, the thing that you seek, and will use it to groom you. Essentially, that's what grooming is. Is finding your need, or creating a need, or creating a hook by which to reel you in. And Shamima's hook was a sense of belonging. Some agency in her world. She wanted to do something. She wanted to be someone. She didn't feel that her being intelligent or diligent or hardworking or from a good family was enough, because the messages that she's received from society say, we don't care how hard you work, we don't care how clever you are, we don't care how middle class you can be, we will still be racist towards you. And the structures that we have set up in society ensures that we check you and we check your progress. And I feel like she was in many ways rebelling against that inevitable outcome or that kind of message. But where was the women's sector when this was happening? Where was she? Where were they when she lost her children from malnutrition and illness? You know, we go on about, you know, needing to have IDVAs in maternity units, in casualty, in housing, and we pride ourselves as a society that deals wholeheartedly with the issue of violence against women and girls. Yet when this young woman who went as a child was seeking refuge and a return to her home, we stripped her of it. So not only are we replicating the violence of ISIS, but we're also using her to make an example of all other women, minoritized women, and say, if you dare rebel, this is the consequence. There will be no help for you. They can let in, and to add insult to injury, they let in 400 Muslim men and boys back from ISIS camps, but they won't let Shamima come back. Quite frankly, I have no time for this kind of duplicity and, you know, this kind of hypocrisy. Either you accept me as a survivor, regardless of where I come from, or don't use feminism. Don't use feminism to elevate you or distinguish you from ISIS, because it's the one and the same coins. You're still using women to further your political ends. And I feel that increasingly with the tragic events of George Floyd and the wake of the civil rights movement, again, that we're now calling Black Lives Matter, the women's sector is being held to account increasingly. And from our own conversations with colleagues and peers, you know, everyone is having these conversations internally. But whether the women's sector will collectively be able to step up and be as passionate about anti-racism and prejudice as they are about misogyny remains to be seen. But if there's anything I can do about it, you best know I will be there.
I believe that. I honestly believe that. And I'm with you when you're like, where were they? Like, where were they? I didn't see any noise, not even a tweet. And not to say I just want to tweet and that's enough, but where are your voices when our women are on a public scale, on a societal scale, being victims of violence against women and girls? I think about Belly Munjinga, I think about Shukri Abdi, and I think about, no, but where were you? Where was your noise? Where was your voice? And so for me, I don't know, there's something around not wanting to be a part of this woman's sector, because ultimately, knowing that if when I pass, and if it is because of any type of violence toward me, I know that it would only be a particular group of women who will be ready to really stand up for me. And so I equally feel like, why am I giving my labor, myself, to these organizations? Like, why am I putting myself in these spaces? And so I don't know, like it's definitely something a lot of me and my peers, a lot of my friends that came into their sector at the same time have really been having that conversation about, do we stay here? Do we build new things, but not wanting to reinvent the wheel, and just being in this space of just unsurety. And something I say on a regular basis is that I will really go and work in the library and do my activism some other type of way, because I can no longer do it in my day-to-day job in these VAWG feminist organizations. You know, even being in these spaces and even speaking about, I guess, feminism in Islam, and I guess what that looks like for Muslim women, and I guess even seeing how a lot of white women can't grapple that fact and kind of just like minimize it to, but yeah, women are oppressed, or Muslim women are oppressed because they wear hijabs, and it's like, what is this how minimal you think when it comes to your feminism? And then so I guess I wanted to ask you, and I know you've mentioned how difficult that can be, in terms of being a feminist and being a Muslim feminist. And I just want to talk about that experience for you and how that's been, and how you managed to kind of navigate all of those spaces in terms of maybe culturally it being feminism. What? Because even for me, it's like, what's this feminism stuff, man? Go and wash the plates. Or, but equally being in like the VAWG or feminist spaces, and there not being space for Islam.
Yes. Gosh, it's my, I mean, I could talk about that for like till the cows come home. Yes, I totally hear you. And I don't think you would be a sane woman if you did not reflect on that frequently. I mean, you know, it burns you out. It really burns you out. But you know what? It won't change unless we fight for it. You know, they won't give it to us. They won't. They just won't. So we've got to take it. We've got to be there to take it. And I think what we therefore need is our safe spaces for replenishment, for healing, so that we can go back out there and do it for all the other sisters that are coming, and all for our ancestors that have fought in these spaces. Because, you know, there are allies out there, but there are also people who don't know what they're doing is harmful. Now, we have got to strike the right balance between not being distracted by their racism, because I often think to myself, if I did not experience racism and feel so passionately about it, what would I be doing? Would I be a mathematician? Would I be a physicist? Would I be, you know, and is this continual labor to prove my humanity and worth a distraction? Because that's what Toni Morrison said, isn't it? I'm like, I cannot, you know, am I feeding the white noise by constantly saying, oh, but I'm worthy, look, we are not oppressed, I'm wearing hijab, but I'm not oppressed, I'm a feminist, and all that stuff. Like, why am I doing this? Who cares what they think?
Trust,
You know what I mean? But I think when I am with my Muslim feminist sisters, oh my God, it's just the most awesome space to be in. It's like I'm on top of the world, and I feel their energy, and I feel like, you know, I am fearless.
Yeah.
And I am resilient, and together we literally we can change the world. It's really hard trying to bring that into a secular white feminist space, even in a sort of women of color space, because there are organizations who have a lot of influence by virtue of their cultural sensitivity, but by their proximity to secularism, they know that if I go on about faith, it's not going to get me to that table.
Yeah.
Let me dial down the faith and religiosity, because what gets me to the table where these conversations of power are had is to look like white feminists or speak their language. And so having to say I'm a Muslim but is something I've decided I'm not going to do anymore.
Yeah.
I'm no one, well, if anyone asks me about hijab, Islam and feminism and the burqa, I did it for 30 years. If you still don't know, I can't help you. Google it, love. Honestly, in the words of the awesome Dorette Jones. Google it.
Google it. I can hear you. Google it, love.
Yeah. It's not my job. It's not my job to tell you. And this debate is a total distraction. I'm not getting into it. You are distracting me from getting to where I need to be. And that is improving the situation of my sisters.
Yeah.
I'm not engaging in these games. So you have to decide through another wise words of a amazing Black academic, either I can't remember her name. You've got to decide, again, I'm using a religious analogy, which hill to be crucified on. I'm not going for that fight. I'm choosing another fight.
Yeah.
So I think what I also find frustrating is that secular feminists, particularly ones that are European based or have their feminism from a European perspective, think that I can't be a Muslim feminist until I've worked out all the issues around religion, hijab, dress, marriage. Why do you presume that I can only be called a feminist if I give you a position paper on Islam's treatment of, marital rape?
Yeah.
And why do you think there's only one Islam?
Yes.
And why do you think that if music, dance, culture, even English law can be used by patriarchy, of course religion can be used by patriarchy regardless.
Exactly.
And if we can ask for the reform of secular laws pertaining to survivors of violence against women and girls, why can't we do the same with Sharia? Why are you telling me abolish Sharia and not abolish British law?
Well, yeah.
And if you are a minoritized person and a woman, you know that British law doesn't give you justice. What I feel very passionate about is the way in which Islamophobia is inherent in the rhetoric of the women's sector, and how they are unable to decolonize their minds from the way in which, it's the rhetoric sometimes that you hear around Islam and feminism is straight out of like a 16th century polemic.
Yeah.
You think, oh my God, like, are we still there? And so I feel like this ignorance of the role of civilization, religion and spirituality, particularly in Islam, is just another manifestation of white supremacy that uses the rhetoric of Orientalism, of Islamophobia to further harm and discriminate. It's you can't continue to do that and think that you are a supporter of women's rights. You can't do that. You can't continuously harm other women yet claim to be saving them. So also the rhetoric around Muslim women is that we're both trying to be saved, but also marginalized at the same time. So you're only a worthy victim if you are a Muslim who believes that her faith and culture are the source of her oppression. If I'm proud of my faith and my culture, then I am to be feared because I have a fifth agenda and I'm trying to Islamicize feminism. No, mate, I'm just trying to maintain a conversation between my values and the divine and my activism.
I'm with you on so many levels. There's so many times I'm just like, I wanted to interrupt, but I'm like, no, let me just let you go off. But like, I'm with that in terms of people actually understanding, like, if they actually do read the Quran, and actually understanding and actually see how women are rights, like how much rights we actually do have, or even like when you said, when you think about in past times, when I even think about like African history, and I think about there wasn't such thing as feminism because women ran the show, and that was a thing. Like matriarchy was very real. Like we ran it, and that was the norm. So we didn't even have to have this feminism stuff because we were treated in the way in which we should have been treated. It was only after colonization that this whole idea on the Western society, this whole equal rights. We didn't need the equal rights because we had everything. You don't even know the half in terms of how I would be treated if I was back home. But of course, because of colonization, there's other issues back home as to why I can't get there. At the beginning of this part, when you were just speaking on about finding the tribe and being around and feeling uplifted around other Muslim feminists or Black feminists, I feel that and I get that because even when I think about a woman who I care for dearly, I think about how we met. So even when I think about you, I met you because of the Women's March and because of Karis saying we need a reporter, and Karis introducing me to you, and you said, okay, come along, Kafayat, this is what we're going to pay you, and this is this, and this is this, and this is with you not even meeting me, but trusting that sister Karis to bring another sister in. And so for the most part, in terms of the women's sector, though I'm just so over it, there are definitely women who I'm still like, my heart is here for, and as much as I want to go and work in that library, I will never leave you all to fight this fight alone. And thinking just quickly on the Women's March, there was a lot of people, and the turnout was great. And you know what, actually was interviewing some young men, and they didn't go to school that day to come to the march, and just to say in their school uniforms and just saying the importance.
Oh, that's so lovely. That makes my heart sing.
And I guess I just want to speak to you a little bit about, I guess, the Women's March, Me Too, and just kind of like where we're at now. And especially with him still being in power, or whatever's happening over there, just in terms of that work and where that work is at now.
Yes, so I left the Women's March in, 2 years now almost, I think in June 2019. And there's just too much to do. I was doing too much. And I think the Women's March as a movement, global movement, has had time to stop and take stock of what it was doing, because I think one of the challenges for me about the Women's March is that it started out in the light of as a reaction to Trump. And to carry on, we really needed to move away from Trump, because he was just a thing that kind of led to us to be focused on, rather than, so what it meant that there was a movement building process that had started long before Trump, but how would we sustain it after him? And I think what was brilliant about the Women's March is the fact that, you know, we were all women of color. We were 5 organizers with 1 white Jewish woman, and the rest we were all minoritized women who are British and have very, you know, unique experience. And we were very clear about our values and our commitment to anti-racism. And I think that, but also it's a symptom of what happens when women are not resourced, is that we cannot continue working You know, we worked 30-hour weeks on top of our jobs.
Wow.
Just to organize stuff. You know, we weren't paid, there was no structure, it was completely top down, absent. We were all horizontal, we were all for like in between school drop-offs, in between work meetings at lunch times at 2 a.m, just calling each other and organizing stuff across, you know, London, and we had a worker in Keighley up north. So we got really burnt out in the end, and we felt that it was time to recuperate and rest. But what we created was something really special. So yeah, that holds a very special place in my heart that day, because you know, I was looking at the coverage and I thought, oh my God, we did that.
Yeah.
You know, we were writing, one of our co-organisers, Aisha, who is like fierce, was putting the application to the London Mayor's office around, like, you know, the permission to get onto the license to march. I remember ordering the speakers on Amazon and lugging them all around London, all the way from Wembley. You know, having my kids there, seeing friends there, like communicating with people on social media, you know, being there for interviews, all that kind of stuff. It was just a very special moment in time. But it also is indicative of what still needs to be done, because there are, and that's the one thing that keeps me here, is also a very, I was at the VAWG conference a couple of years ago, again in a space, a workshop that discussed faith and feminism, and we had I think she was the head priest of St James's church that's in Piccadilly, and she was talking to a survivor of sexual abuse from the church, who said to her, why should I turn up if your church did this to me? Why should I be? And then the priest turned around and said, because I need you to be there so that I can stay there and fight for you. If we vacate these spaces, who are we fighting for? If we're not in them, how will we achieve change? I need you and others to be in the women's sector, so that we not only validate each other and support each other, but I can fight in your name and you can fight in mine. Because if these places were, and it's hard and it's toxic, but we've got to find ways of making it safe for each other. Because unless we occupy these spaces, then there will be nowhere for us to go. And living in a parallel system is not an option. You know, we know we've been doing it all our lives. We've been, you know, code switching, we've been finding our safe spaces. But if we don't take what is rightfully ours, then we have let our ancestors down, who have faced unimaginable obstacles, and I've let my future sisters and brothers down because I just chose the easy way. And I think that's the hardest thing, is knowing when to go and replenish and pass it on, like a baton race, relay. Hand it on, take a rest.
Yeah.
And we need a movement that builds that. We need self-care spaces. We need to be thinking about other things than just funding, so that we don't disappear.
Yeah.
So we need sustainability, we need length, we need strength, we need self-care in our spaces, so that we continue fighting the good fight and making it better for our daughters to come and our sons.